I'm Gerhard Lazu, and you're listening to ShipIt.show, a podcast about ops, infrastructure, and cool walls. Tamer Saleh, founder of SuperOrbital, a tiny team of exceptional Kubernetes engineers and teachers, is joining me today to talk about what is cool in the cloud-native world. We also cover two great blog posts, Zero to GitOps, Terraform and AWS EKS Blueprints project by Sean Kane, and Hunting Down an Intermittent Failure in Cilium by James McShane. We wrap up with a cool wall of cloud native. Big thanks to our partners Fastly and Fly. This MP3 is served with minimal latency from the Fastly edge location, which is closest to you. Our app and database run on Fly.io because it keeps things simple. Our CI runtime also runs on Fly.io. Pull request 416 has more details.
This episode is brought to you by Honeycomb. Find your most perplexing application issues. Honeycomb is a fast analysis tool that reveals the truth about every aspect of your application in production. Find out how users experience your code in complex and unpredictable environments. Find patterns and outliers across billions of rows of data and definitively solve your problems. And we use Honeycomb here at Changelog. That's why we welcome the opportunity to add them as one of our infrastructure partners. In particular, we use Honeycomb to track down CDN issues recently, which we talked about at length on the Kaizen edition of the Ship It podcast. So check that out. Here's the thing. Teams who don't use Honeycomb are forced to find the needle in the haystack. They scroll through endless dashboards playing whack-a-mole. They deal with alert floods, trying to guess which one matters, and they go from tool to tool to tool playing sleuth, trying to figure out how all the puzzle pieces fit together. It's this context switching and tool sprawl that are slowly killing teams' effectiveness and ultimately hindering their business. With Honeycomb, you get a fast, unified, and clear understanding of the one thing driving your business: production. With Honeycomb, you guess less and you know more. Join the swarm and try Honeycomb free today at honeycomb.io/changelog. Again, honeycomb.io/changelog.
We are going to ship in 3, 2, 1.
So episode 51 is the last one when we had Tamer on. Actually, the first one as well for Tamer. We were talking with Kubernetes as a platform. And one of the people that enjoyed it the most was Jared. And he said, hey, Gerhard, you have to get Tamer back.
Yeah, I totally bribed him for that. That was my fault.
Exactly. Now, this week, it's Jared's birthday. I won't tell you which day, but it's a big one. So, Jared, birthday surprise. Tamer's back.
It's like the worst birthday present ever.
It just so happened. Well, not if you enjoy it. Jared just enjoys this conversation. So let's make the best of it. Again, back of our minds. It's for Jared's birthday. So here it comes.
Happy birthday, Jared.
Yes, happy birthday. I still have to send a tweet out. Okay, it's in a draft. Thank you for reminding. So Tamer, what is new with you? It's been 7-8 months. What is new and what is good?
A lot of things are new and good. I mean, from our business point of view, things have been just going wonderfully, which is, fingers crossed, knock on wood. We were very worried about the economic downturn, but we haven't seen any signs of it. So that's been great. And also just watching some of the technologies that have been evolving in the cloud native ecosystem has been a lot of fun as well. I mean, one of the things that a lot of our engineers are really excited about, for example, is SigStore and the work that's been going on there. A lot of activity there. It's been very interesting. In terms of what technologies I'm still very excited about, I think I'm a bit of an outlier because for me, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the cloud native world, but the two technologies that I tend to get most excited about are actually the eBPF stuff, all the different tools that are focusing on eBPF, and WASM, which is almost like a non-cloud native thing to say, right? It's almost like, we don't talk about WASM in Kubernetes because it's, not really containers and such. But those two technologies have a lot of potential to open up a lot of interesting doors, a lot of different directions that both those technologies can go.
Right. So it's very interesting that you mentioned those two technologies, because in the recording schedule, I mean, you're listening to this, I think at least a month before, like a month after it was recorded. Mm-hmm. So tomorrow, Liz Rice and Thomas Graf, eBPF.
Oh, really?
That's what's happening tomorrow. Yes. So it will be all about eBPF. So bang on the money. Thank you for confirming that. And WASM, it's really interesting. It's the second time I hear it in 2 weeks. And the last person I heard it from was like the last episode which was recorded. No, the one before that. Anyways, a recent episode. You wouldn't believe it. Gary Bernhardt and WASM. What the two have in common? Really? Seriously?
Well, I want to make it very clear. The fact that I'm excited about these technologies is not necessarily an indicator that they're going to be successful. I have a horrible track record of identifying successful products. I remember this company came by and was searching for developers when they were very small. I think they were searching for like their 10 to 20 next developers, right? So they were like 10 to 20 people big. And I was talking to somebody, I'm like, what are they even talking about? Like, it's a blogging platform, but it's only 140 characters. There's no way that's going to go anywhere. This is a terrible idea, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I have not been very good at identifying great technology. I like to think about Nix, for example. Nix OS, Nix? Like, it's a very interesting, very cool idea, right? With some fatal flaws, unfortunately, but it does so much interesting stuff, and it changes the whole game. And I like to think about how Nix it's kind of like 1950s sci-fi authors. Like I'm rereading Foundation, right? And their vision of the future was adorable, right? It's like, oh yeah, I could see how this would work. Like spaceships without computers, and you would actually manually align the stars and navigate that way, right? It's kind of cute. But you could totally see how that future could have been a reality. Yep. And to me, things like Nix fit into there. If Nix had won, arguably Docker never would have existed, at least in terms of like an image format, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know, eBPF, WASM, I think they're fantastic. Maybe that means you should not buy their stock,
I think that while Twitter is a great story right now in hindsight and in retrospect, because that's what we're talking about. Twitter, Tamer not identifying Twitter, and not joining, like as engineer number 8 or 9.
Yeah, I saw the demise of Twitter decades ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was never going to catch on, and even now, no. I think you're getting better at it, and let me tell you why. So after we had our conversation, episode 31, you mentioned Nix in that one. You mentioned Nix3.dev.
Yeah.
Off of that, I talked to Vincent. We have the Nix3.dev episode. Vincent Ambo from TVL. I switched my Linux workstation to NixOS. Mm-hmm. And I love it. Homebrew, it didn't make it to my new Mac. It was Nix.
I actually have that as a to-do item on my list to get rid of Homebrew and move over to Nix for my local development experience.
Oh, yes. On a Mac. Again, that's just like, so...
Yes, on a Mac.
Exactly. Now, that was good. I mean, there's like some weird issues around. For example, I always have to reinstall it for some reason whenever I reboot. So just basically don't reboot your Mac. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Anyways.
Small issues. I mean, it's fine.
Small issue, it's okay. So if you reboot your Mac, you have to reinstall for everything to start working again. I'm definitely doing something wrong. But on Linux, I've been loving it. Fanless AMD Ryzen 7, I think, 5900, 16 cores, all NixOS, really, really nice experience. Everything is declarative. I love that world. So you're, again, right on the money with that. Based on some recent conversations, WASM and eBPF, I think you may be right there again. Don't buy their stock, for sure. Not that they have any stock, but, right. Just to be clear.
I think Nix... Like I said, I think it's got some amazing things. I think if you're all in on Nix and you're committed to learning what's the name of the Nix language? The Nix configuration language, something like that.
It's the Nix language. Yeah.
Then I think it can be really successful. The problem is that Nix is a great solution for a personal dev. It's a great personal choice as a developer, right? It's a bad solution for a wider team right? If you got a team of like 3 to 5 and you all agree, sure, we're going to go heads down into this Nix thing and we're going to reap a bunch of benefits from it. That's okay. But I've talked to teams of larger, like 100 to 1,000 person companies that have tried to adopt Nix across the board. And it's just too esoteric. It's too opaque. It's too hard for, I don't want to say the average developer to use, right?
I can see that. I can really see that. Like still some things which I struggle, and it's like some things are way too hard. And I'm still waiting for my next session with Vincent, just like to figure out what am I going to do next, because it's so complicated.
Yeah, would you need to reach out to the founder in order to debug your own system?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not a good sign.
Yeah, I'm very curious to hear how Mitchell Hashimoto does it, because I know he's all in on NixOS for development.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Seriously.
Yeah. But this actually kind of proves the point. He is exactly the type of developer, and now we can say that he's just a developer, right?
Yes.
He is exactly the type of developer that would reap a lot of benefits from Nix. He just decides to go all in on that, and that's great.
Yeah.
I come from an operations background primarily, and so as an ops person, like especially in the olden days, you used to use like legacy VI instead of Vim because you couldn't be confident that the workstation that you were, the machine you were SSHing into had Vim, right? And you certainly wouldn't use like a highly tweaked environment. So I think Nix is a great solution for application developers who, like I said, want to go full in on that, and maybe even DevOps. I'm really interested to hear about any company that goes with Nix in production. Like, I think that would be I don't know of any. I'm sure they exist, and I'd love to talk to anybody who's done that just to get their war stories and to see how it works, because I think Nix in production is a very interesting story.
This is one for the listeners. This is one for you listening to this. If you know anyone, reach out.
Yes, please.
Very, very interested to tell that story. Okay. Switching gears, back to Kubernetes. Do you think that it still needs a platform? Because that's what we're trying to answer in episode 51. Is Kubernetes a platform? And if you think it still needs a platform, have you tried any? And anything good out there that works as a platform?
I do still think that Kubernetes needs a platform even more than I felt that way before. I think I see a bunch of interesting platform services out there. So I saw that changelog, I think you all migrated to fly.io, right?
That's right.
And that's the one that's got all of the marketing attention right now. You go on Hacker News, everybody's talking about fly.io. I apologize to the people at Fly. We tried Fly for one of our internal products. We had not a great experience with it, right? And we actually...
No, hang on. You have to tell us more about that. That's too interesting. I can't pass on that. All right. If we took 5 minutes for next, we can definitely take 5 minutes for this. Go on then.
Okay. Well, it's not going to be 5 minutes because there's not that much detail. I wasn't the primary developer, but I was pairing on the software with the main developer. And the problems we saw with Fly was mostly around polish. The documentation was fairly poor and sometimes out of date and misleading, and how you accomplished what we thought of as fairly normal things was a little bit more complicated. This is coming from a Heroku world, because the primary developer on this Rails application was, a Rails developer. They're used to Heroku, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that over time Fly is going to get better. From what I've seen, render.io is the one that nobody talks about, but seems to be a much better experience. If we were going to do it again, we would do it with Render. While I'm giving shout outs to great user experience, there's a tool called Doppler for secrets management. Mm-hmm. I actually reached out to the founders of Doppler because their user experience, just the flow of using Doppler, they really nail it, right? So if you're interested in secrets management for, small to medium-sized teams, you should really check that out.
Okay.
And it kind of fits into the platform space because it's, managing your secrets across environments and all that. But the thing is, both Fly and Render, they've got great mission statements. They're really interesting tools. They're not built on Kubernetes, and they have no intention, from what I've seen, of going on-premise, right? So that still doesn't solve the main problem for most of the teams that we work with. There are other options, like Humanitech is the big one. I just talked to the founders of Mia just earlier this morning, which is a European competitor to
Sebastian.
Yep. And obviously there's like Backstage, which is the open source, and there's a service for Backstage as well. But none of them are winning right now. I mean, none of them are gaining any significant market share from what we've seen on the ground. Their biggest competitor is still very expensive internal platform teams. So we're still seeing a lot of companies running like 4-person internal platform teams that their customers are the application developers, and they're stringing together all this GitOps stuff into Argo with Kubernetes and maybe with like a golden Helm chart or something. And don't get me wrong, like that kind of works. You know, it's table stakes for using Kubernetes as an application developer. But there's so much more potential, especially with things like SigStore now getting so much attention. It's such an exciting technology. Having to string that into your internal platform is hugely painful. I mean, I think a lot of these teams are starting to realize that building an internal platform for their development team is not the same as maintaining it. So you might think, oh, we'll throw together a platform team. We'll put 4 people together. They'll build this thing, and then we can devolve that team and move them onto other projects. No, that team is going to stay, if not grow, because your platform has to evolve with the fast-moving cloud-native landscape. It's just a thing. And so I think that there's a lot of potential for a platform. And by the way, as a little sidebar, platform doesn't mean dashboard. I've seen a lot of products out there that just give a UI exposing Kubernetes API primitives. That's not useful. That's not a platform. That's just point and click because I'm afraid to use the command line. And every dev that I know who uses Kubernetes would rather use some command line tool, right? Even if it's K9s, they'd rather use some command line tool for that.
Yep.
The platform is about integrating everything together and giving a smooth developer experience. It has to be tied to the developer workflow. It has to have some sort of opinions. That's tricky, though, because as we've seen, I mean, you and I worked together at Cloud Foundry, and Cloud Foundry lost the battle against Kubernetes, the battle for the platforms, even though it had such a head start. And I think a lot of the reason it lost was because it had too many opinions, right? It had too many ideas of how you should be developing software, and it didn't allow for outliers, right? It didn't allow you to step outside those bounds when you truly needed to. Our answer was pretty terrible for that. And in reality, devs want to tweak, right? They want to believe their problem is unique, that they have a hard problem that can only be solved in a special way. And so a platform on Kubernetes needs to be able to thread that needle, and part of that is the ability to break glass in case of emergency. You have to be able to give the developers access to the API. You have to be able to give the developers a chance to go outside the bounds of the platform, but the platform still needs to make it as easy as possible to do the right thing.
I'm really glad that you mentioned Cloud Foundry, because for me as well, that experience, just like the getting started, the 0 to 1 sort of thing, was really nice. I mean, you had the services, you could bind things, the secrets would be there. Like, it was working. The routing was interesting. The build packs was really, really nice. And then once you were there, things started getting a bit complicated. I think that's where the opinions started to show.
Yeah, there was growing pains.
Yeah, exactly what people wanted to do versus what was possible. And some opinions were so not strongly held, but like strongly implemented. It was very difficult to change course from the defaults. I always felt like that was the case. So I remember thinking, I was looking at Concourse and I was thinking, wow, Concourse, just the way it orchestrates things, like the way things happen and the way scaling happens in Concourse for the jobs and the inputs and the outputs and the long running thing, I was thinking, wow, this is very similar to what happens, all the orchestration that happens within Cloud Foundry, because there's like a lot of orchestration, like the really hard stuff. Kubernetes scheduling, I mean, it is a hard problem, but it does it easily. And I think it's better at scheduling stateful things as well. Like, okay, again, I still think you wouldn't recommend running databases in Kubernetes.
Yeah, I listened to Kelsey on your previous episode. In fact, I've used that in our workshops when we talk about running stateful sets on Kubernetes.
But you can. I mean, and we did. Like, it wasn't great, but it worked. Now, doing the same with Cloud Foundry, I don't think it was possible. And then I was starting to see those similarities between what Bosch was doing It was the tool that was like laying down everything, paving, repaving, just basically managing all the infrastructure, all the software that was running. And it had some great things. But again, I was starting to see those commonalities between Bosch, Cloud Foundry, and to some extent, Concourse. And then Kubernetes came along and it just like changed everything. And I don't think anyone was expecting that very, very quickly as well. It was like a sweeping tide that, took everything. That was a very interesting one. Now, one of the recent blog posts on SuperOrbital, I think you're calling it the journal, Zero to GitOps, by Sean Kane.
Yep.
Flipping the bits on the internet since I was 8. You can go and check the blog post since I was 8. Me, Gerhard, was 8, just to make it clear. So that you could go and check it out to see how long has Sean been flipping bits. It has a quick start repository, basic walkthrough in the article. It's looking really good. I mean, you can get a lot done on EKS, AWS EKS, with Argo CD, with Terraform, which is interesting, but you're only using Terraform to bootstrap things.
Yes.
Again, there's a repo, everything is there. I think there's something there. Now, Marcos and Joel, if you're listening, check this out. 3 Terraform modules to go from a potentially empty AWS account to an EKS cluster that contains some core Kubernetes software and can be targeted by an existing CI/CD pipeline. I think there's something there.
And just I don't want SuperOrbital to take too much credit for that. We did this work in conjunction with a client. You can read more about it on the blog post. But a lot of this was also done in conjunction with AWS because this was the brand new AWS EKS Blueprint Terraform module. And we were very impressed. I got to say, AWS has not been so impressive in most of their open source stuff, right? They've been very anti-Terraform for a long time. Obviously, they've got their own competing products to Terraform. And they released this thing, which not only, obviously, targets Terraform, but also had the right boundaries. Terraform is an amazing tool if you stay within its sweet spot. Terraform can do a lot more. You can manage Kubernetes resources with Terraform. You absolutely do not want to do that for a variety of reasons. You can do magic with Terraform, and I'm guilty of attempting to do too much magic with Terraform in my code, where I have it do the VM provisioning and configuration and then orchestrate all this other stuff. You don't want to use Terraform as orchestration, is basically the statement there. You want to use it to lay the bedrock, and you want a higher orchestration layer on top of it that does the rest of the stuff. And the way that they configured the AWS EKS Blueprint module is kind of perfect, where it just lays in enough Kubernetes resources into the new cluster to get you going, and then everything else is Argo GitOps, right?
I always thought of Terraform as this slow, convergent loop, and Argo CD as being this fast one. Things happen much faster, or even like the Kubernetes scheduler.
Yeah.
So Terraform is great, in my experience, at slow things that move slowly, and there's like some state, and then you commit it, or you save it somewhere, versus something like the Kubernetes scheduler where things happen a lot quicker. Argo CD the same way. It's a lot more reactive.
I like that. That's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah. But it's also, Terraform, the way that Terraform is developed by HashiCorp is very different than the way that the core team develops Kubernetes. Terraform has a ton of bugs, right? Let's be honest. They had to call GitHub issue bankruptcy a while back. What was that, like 3 months ago, where they just started saying, I'm sorry, we don't have enough engineers, even though we doubled in size from what was it, 500 to 1,000. But we don't have enough engineers to deal with all the Terraform issues, so we're just going to put a pause on it. I can't believe they did that. It's always had so many rough edges, right? And you look at the Kubernetes core team and how they move, it's very different. No major features have come out of Kubernetes in the last, 2 years? It's a very mature product already. And part of that is because the core team has been very smart about exposing the right APIs so that third party and the cloud native landscape, like other utilities, can implement those more interesting features, those more innovative features on top of the platform. And the core team said, look, Kubernetes as a platform needs to focus on polish and maturity. I mean, I think release 118 was called something like the fit and finish release, right? I mean, that was a while ago.
Yeah.
In fact, they've even been removing features, sometimes a little too aggressively for my taste, like when they removed pod security policies before they had a solution. But they always had another solution, which was the validating emission webhooks, right? You could always do something. And so I think HashiCorp attempted to take on too much with Terraform, and they should have instead focused on just making it work correctly in all scenarios and pushed all the innovation into a plugin system or something the way that Kubernetes does.
You just gave me another idea. I had it for a while, but just gave me another one. I think I want to talk to James Bayer. That's who I'm thinking about. I said hi to him when I was talking to Rosemary and Rob from HashiCorp about Vault. But I think this just reminds me that there's something there. There's something to look in Terraform, because I know that like many people, as like riddled with, shortcomings as it is, they have a good problem. Lots of users demanding fixes and demanding things. And like, it's just there. It's like Bash at this point, I think.
Yeah, Terraform is the air you breathe. When we talk to clients about, what kind of technologies we basically primarily work on, when we're talking to developers who want to join SuperOrbital, we say, every project that we work on has some amount of Kubernetes. It wouldn't make sense for a client to engage with us unless there was Kubernetes, and we wouldn't take a project that didn't have it. It's not, aligned with our vision. But also every project has Terraform, because Terraform is everywhere. It's underneath everything. It's the bedrock for everything that we do, unless you're one of those poor souls who are using AWS.
Bash.
Or Bash. No, what's the AWS competitor to Terraform again?
Is it CDK?
No, not the CDK. That one's actually interesting. That's okay. That's more like Pulumi, right?
Gosh, CloudFormation.
CloudFormation. Oh,
With Chef.
Yeah. It's horrible. It's so bad. And it's like this deep JSON structures. And it's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah, oh yes. Now, back to winning horses, eBPF, and great blog posts. James McShane.
Yep.
Blog post, again, like in the last 7 months since we've spoken, hunting down an intermittent failure in Cilium.
I love James's blog post because James goes so deep. It's crazy. It's beautiful how deep he goes when he's debugging these things on client engagements, but also when he writes about them on our blog. It's like, if you see that the post is written by James, then you got to set it aside, grab half an hour to really dig into what he's doing, because it's fun stuff.
Yeah. The thing which I like about it has just enough information. It's making steady progress. As I was reading it, I just wanted to read more and more, and it didn't keep me waiting. So there's like always something. I loved how it was unfolding. There's links to GitHub pull requests, because damn it, I want to see the code. And right, otherwise it's just like words. Doesn't matter how amazing they are. I just want to see the code. And it's a really good one. Like Cilium, eBPF, it's all there. Observability, diagrams, even for architects. You will like that. I think you will. Now I have a question to you, Tamer. How can readers submit fixes?
Wait, hold on.
What?
Are you going to ask me a deep question about Cilium with EVP? Because I'm not your man, all right?
No. James, can you join us, please?
Yeah, James, where are you? Come here,
I couldn't figure out how to submit fixes to the blog post. Do you have them somewhere like in GitHub?
Oh, man.
How does that work? Don't tell me WordPress.
What you're suggesting doesn't make any sense. There are no fixes to be made to our publications. I mean, they're perfect, right?
They are, of course.
But if you did think that you found something, we don't have it open source. We should open this up. Just shoot us an email. It goes to everyone. So
okay, cool. What about dates? I'm really missing those dates on the articles just when they're published. Can you take the notepad and write it down, please?
Sean McShane, who wrote the other blog post, he just brought up the same, but she's like, why aren't there not dates on the blog post? So I'm like, you're right. Okay. It's just stuff to be done. Let's just say it's the tyranny of success, right? We're so busy. We haven't.
I love that. We
We do need to do that. I had a thing on my personal blog for a while that I think is now completely broken, but I like to say this blog post is now so many days old, which means it's almost definitely out of date, right? I mean, come on, this is all deeply technical stuff. Even by the time we finished this Cilium issue, like James submitted pull requests, right? I mean, this thing is going to now be fixed. So,
Yep.
Yeah. But very good feedback. Thank you, Gerhard. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Always. Also, last one, promise. Who's the author for On-Ramp to Supply Chain Security?
Oh, they forgot to put themselves on there. That is also James McShane.
All right.
Yeah, that's also James McShane. So he should have added the correct metadata to the preamble in the Markdown blog post. See, we are geeks.
See? Great. No WordPress. Amazing. That's what I was afraid at some point.
No. It's a static site. It's just got so much other stuff in there. Sometimes it's got, for example, workshops that we're still working on and we don't want to mention publicly yet.
Yeah.
But that's a silly reason. We should just put it on there.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Fire Hydrant. Fire Hydrant is a reliability platform for every developer. Incidents are a when, not an if situation, and they impact everyone in the organization, not just SREs. And I'm here with Robert Ross, founder and CEO of Fire Hydrant. Robert, what is it about teams getting distracted by incidents and not being able to focus on the core product that upsets you?
I think that incidents bring a lot of anxiety and sometimes fear and maybe even a level of shame that can cause this paralysis in an organization from progress. And when you have the confidence to manage incidents at any scale of any variety, everyone just has this breath of fresh air that they can go build the core product even more. I don't know if anyone's had the opportunity, maybe is the word, to call the fire department, but no matter what, when the fire department shows up, it doesn't matter if the building is hugely on fire. They are calm, cool, and collected because they know exactly what they're going to do. And that's what Fire Hydrant is built to help people achieve.
Very cool. Thank you, Robert. If you want to operate as a calm, cool, collected team when incidents happen, you got to check out Fire Hydrant. Small teams up to 10 people can get started for free with all the features. No credit card required to sign up. Get started at firehydrant.com. Again, firehydrant.com.
Because we talked about Sigstore, really cool thing, supply chain. Have you used any of the CLIs like BOM, Recor?
James and a couple of our other engineers are really deep into Sigstore. James has actually been participating in the community meetings and things like that. I'm going to be frank, myself, I get very little chance nowadays to play with anything. Like if I can find an hour on the weekends to hack, I'm tweaking my Vim config or whatnot. But
or jump on a podcast.
Right, or jumping on a podcast. But they've played with some of the CLI stuff. I mean, we've been implementing this also for some of our clients. It's very interesting stuff, right?
Okay. I think I'm feeling a follow-up coming, but let's put a pin in that.
I like that. What we could do is we could actually have James come in and talk more about the supply chain stuff that we've been doing.
That's exactly what I'm thinking now. I'm going to do a Tamer, and you tell me if you recognize yourself. This goes many years back.
Oh, God, no.
Okay, are you watching? Who has two thumbs and is awesome?
Who has two thumbs and loves being on podcasts? There we go.
Exactly. That is the second meeting. When I've seen you lead the meeting, and I thought, this guy's crazy in all the right ways.
I need to get out of here. I actually taught my 6-year-old daughter the two thumbs thing. She saw it in the movie. She's like, what is that? I'm like, well, do you have two thumbs, right? And then you point to yourself and you say something. And yeah.
Yep. Oh, that was a good one. That was a good one. Do you still do that?
No, Gerhard, it's worse. Now that I'm a father, my jokes have gotten even more dated, even worse than that.
I see. Okay. All right. I'm still going to use it. So
Oh, you got my permission. You got my
all
permission.
right, thank you very much. It's a Tammer special. What do you see the teams that you train struggle with the most?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, our workshops all focus on Kubernetes. Our most popular workshop is just the core Kubernetes workshop. It's like a week long, goes really deep on Kubernetes. And our second most is Docker. But then we've got much deeper workshops in like programming Kubernetes, Istio, Kubernetes in production, containers demystified. So like the Linux system calls that make containers work. But for our two most popular workshops, the core Kubernetes and the Docker workshop, Kubernetes has a deep domain to it. There are so many different objects you have to understand. And I always thought that that would be the hardest thing for our students. And so when we first developed the workshop, it focused on making sure students understand what all these terms mean and all that. But that's just natural with the progression of the workshop. So the students pick this stuff up as we're delivering it. The workshop is designed to walk you through all these terms in the right order and all of that. It turns out that the students that struggle the most in our workshops are the students that come from, and I'm not saying this to be disparaging, but it's just different backgrounds. You learn different things. The students who come from Windows or Java. And the reason that they struggle the most is because they're trying to learn Kubernetes at the same time that they're also trying to learn the bash command line, or what Linux processes and users are, or how the kernel works with like requests and limits and things like that, or just networking, like what a private IP address is versus a public IP address. So, that's still in Java and Windows, but still, like there's that foundational level of knowledge that a lot of our students don't necessarily have. And so we've put a lot of effort, and we're still putting a lot of effort into adapting our workshops so that we teach those necessary little nuggets at the same time that we're teaching the Kubernetes content. And our students have really enjoyed that. We've gotten really good feedback from that because they feel that they're learning so much packed into that 1 week. I also, though, I got to be honest with you, I kind of feel like it's an indication of the bit of a step backwards that happened with Docker and Kubernetes, right? I mean, Docker in particular was a huge benefit to the development community because it allowed us to package up our software in a very repeatable way, right? To deliver that one package of software. It's like what Java did with jars and wars, but applied to any runtime, right? We all know this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, crafting a Docker file, like really, as an application developer, I need to know how the esoteric command line flags to apt get install, and I need to understand, like, you used to have to remove the apt get cache in between layers in order to the stuff you have to do, it's making every developer a DevOps, right? And that is just reflected in the fact that we require our students to understand how to work with bash, what Linux is, how the kernel works, how networking works. All that stuff is, so in many ways, Kubernetes and Docker are just thin wrappers over that stuff. And they should be, we're just getting right back to the platform conversation. There should be a higher level abstraction. Developers should not have to be completely full stack all the way from front end down to operations. That is too much to ask.
Yeah. So what do you think that would look like? Like, I think build packs were going in that direction, in that you didn't need to know how to package your code in the context of Cloud Foundry. That would just happen behind the scenes. I know that build packs are still around. I don't know who's using them in the context of Kubernetes, but I know they're there.
Yeah.
Is it build packs? Is it something else? What do you think?
It's a great question. I feel like build packs were the wrong way to abstract things. I think build packs were exactly what you were describing earlier. They were an example of something that works really well in the 80% case and really terribly in the 20% case. Because if you ever needed to go beyond what was provided in the Ruby or the Java build pack, then you needed to take some crazy steps to extend that build pack. You maybe even as far as forking the build pack repo and using your own custom build pack, maybe using like a multi-build pack and layering something. It was really bad, right?
Yeah.
I think that build packs have also had the fundamental problem of not being able to apply security updates transparently. So if you had, I don't know, like a remote code vulnerability in Bash, which would, I mean, that's crazy. That would never happen.
Right.
Then you were responsible for targeting the latest version of the build pack and making sure that that was what your application's running on, which, by the way, Docker has the same problem, right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned that build packs are still happening. They are. The Open Build Pack project is still a thing. I don't know of anyone using it in production, but VMware, now Broadcom, I guess, is completely behind it, right? And one thing that they figured out, which I thought was really, really interesting, is that we always think of the Docker layers as being a Git-like tree where each layer depends upon the other layer. That's actually not technically true, right? That's only true in how Docker uses the layers. You can actually change out an underlying layer. If you think about what the layers are in Linux, they're just overlay FS layers, right? You can change one below. It's totally fine. If you do it in a way that's incompatible with an upper layer, well, then you've got problems. But the build pack team has realized that they can apply security updates transparently to an existing build pack, which is interesting.
That's really cool. Yeah, I didn't know about that. That's really cool, actually.
It's pretty interesting stuff. If only it was adopted, right? But again,
Right.
still, build packs have the same problem we just talked about. They're great for the 80%, bad for the 20%. But this is exactly where I think something like Nix has a lot of potential. Like Nix could have made Docker irrelevant and could have abstracted away the things that we think of in a production Docker file. You could have just listed your dependencies in a manifest, and your application would run within there. Maybe there would be a stronger contract about how your application runs, because build packs were that way. Build packs were 12-factor, right? Could have had that same 12-factor contract, but allowing you to very easily specify all the dependencies that you might need. It could have been really interesting. But, I mean, in reality, nobody's doing anything other than Docker, right? There's no significant competing technology than crafting a Docker file by hand.
Yeah. Well, publicly, no. Behind closed doors, yes. And I think that is slowly changing. But I have so many thoughts running through my head right now. I see the potential in Nix. And this is slightly awkward because this episode, we're recording it before another one, which will come out early. So I'll have to tell you something that hasn't happened yet. So let's imagine that.
Can you just mute the microphone and just tell me? Could you do that?
Well, we could edit it out, but I think it just makes sense for this to flow in the conversation. So I think it's okay to leave it as is. The episode before this one is the one with Alex Sorachi. We're talking about base. We're talking about concourse. We're talking about the CI/CD and how that applies to
What's base?
the base language. It's his fun project. Baselang.org. I know. He's building a Lisp-inspired language for automation. It's using Nix in some parts, but it's also using bass, BASS-lang.org.
Yeah, BASE lang. Yeah.
BASE. So that's the episode before this one. And so when you were talking about Docker and the Docker files and all that, it just made me think about this because I think it's all relevant. And the fact that you didn't know, by the way, you didn't know for sure that this was happening. I see the correlation between CI/CD and the role that it can play. And I don't mean CI/CD like GitHub Actions. I don't mean that. I mean CI/CD in the sense of, well, I'm going to mention the D word. It's not Docker. It's the other one. It's Dagger. Okay, so it's Dagger and Base and Nix. I'm starting to see a thread between them. And I see the language, the importance of the language, which, by the way, it's not Docker files. It's not that. We tried it. It has serious limitations. We couldn't work around them in all the years that, we've been trying to do something about it. And we started with Q, because that's what we're using a Dagger to basically instruct basically capture all the things that need to happen to produce those artifacts, because that's what it is. It's just instructions today to build Git. Tomorrow, who knows? But there's this concept of automating the build and also the deployment, because it's all about automation, right? You don't want to be installing tools locally to be controlling, AWS or Terraform or whatever. You want to consume images which are pre-built, secured with all things in them to just do the action that you want to do. And if you use Yarn, you shouldn't really care what goes into like the yarn packaging. The yarn package should have that built in. If you're using Mix, if you're using Elixir or Ruby, with Ruby Gems, a bundler, whatever it is these days, you shouldn't care. So it's a bit of build packs, a bit of Dockerfile, a bit of CI/CD, add an amazing cache. And that is the future that I'm thinking about. So what do you do for CI/CD these days, and how do you see that link to Kubernetes? Because there is one for sure. And I think we are finding its edges, and it's something which I'm fascinated by.
So what actually James McShane, who was the author of that blog post that you talked about before, he was a contributor to Tekton for a long time. I think he's still active in the Tekton community. And I view Tekton as the spiritual successor to Concourse. For those of you who don't know, we've mentioned Concourse a few times, right? Concourse came out of Alex Sirachi's work with Cloud Foundry, and it was very focused on solving a problem for our relatively large number of application development teams, right? We were building essentially a microservice architecture that would ship in a box, and Concourse, which I like to call now like a workflow engine as opposed to a CI/CD system, because it's really just takes action on any trigger and then it can produce new things on the other side. And the cool thing about that is,
you just said the engine words. Unbelievable. Dagger is an engine from the future. And it is like, wow, man, like I cannot make this up. You said it, and I cannot believe it, because like conversations with different people are coming together in ways. Again, this is like you're listening to this a month after it was recorded, at least a month, by the way. You will have heard the Alex interview, which hasn't happened yet. And it's amazing how these things are just coming together in ways. Not to mention the conversations which we're having with Solomon and Andrea and Sam, like all like the Docker founders, the Dagger founders. I mean, it's just crazy. It's crazy. Okay, but please continue.
I love Alex. I think he's one of the top 3 developers I've ever met in my life. He is just phenomenal. He's a very empathetic person. He's just a wonderful person, wonderful human in general, right? And Concourse was visionary. The way that Concourse was designed, his ability to cut right through a problem and get to the fundamentals and build essentially a toolkit that had so much more potential than anything we would have built by committee, right? It was really beautiful. The problem is that Concourse, it's totally showing its age. It's not Kubernetes native. It's last I checked, and maybe this has changed now, it did not use Docker under the hood, which means it behaved a little weirdly, like entry points were not respected and things like that. There's a lot of pain now in using Concourse. If you were going to use a workflow engine now, it would be something like Tekton instead. But even Tekton, I've keep looking at all these existing CI systems, all these workflow engine-like systems, and they all suffer from a lack of usability. They're all like very focused, kind of like Kubernetes, on being building blocks, and maybe you're supposed to build something on top of them. I'm waiting for something to come out that is much more usable, still very GitOps friendly. You define the pipeline in Git and such, but is much easier to use, has a bunch of stuff built in. I'm waiting for that to happen.
I'm working on it, Tamer. Seriously, I'm working on it. No joke.
Very excited, Gerard. I'm very excited.
It's been 7 months. It's a hard problem, okay? Me and a bunch of very smart people are still on this thing.
Yep. Now, in the wild, though, you ask, like, what are we seeing people use for CI systems? I hate to say it, but like GitHub Actions and GitLab runners are really taking over. And I think it's a little bit unfortunate. I think there's some really great aspects of both those systems. And I understand why they became so popular when you compare them to other strict CI systems. But the power of something like Concourse, it's almost a replacement for actual application code. I mean, it's like you could build a Concourse. When Alex first created Concourse, I tried to convince him that we should not label it a CI system. We should position it as a competitor to AWS Lambda, because I felt that it could be.
And you're telling me that you're not a good product person? Now that is genius.
I don't know.
You're not seeing it?
I don't know a lot of people who actually use Lambda in anger.
I think you're just being humble. I think that's what it is. I think you're just downplaying it. But that's a great move, by the way.
I think there's a lot of potential for something like that. I think.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Anyways.
Oh, yes. No, it is for sure. It is for sure. And it's coming back. The great ideas will be circular. They will keep coming back until someone makes them happen.
They'll keep knocking until somebody opens that door.
Exactly. Yeah. And is willing to put up with the mess that this space is, because it is a mess, powers through, figures the DX, figures the interactions, the integration points, figures the community out. There's so many aspects to this. And we may fail. I may fail. But oh man, I'm going to try so hard. It's worth trying. It's worth it.
One of these days, Nyx will win.
Well, Nyx is in the mix in a very unexpected way, but it is there. It is there. And I really like what you mentioned about Alex, because I see the same. There is an element of genius. There's no other way that I can put this.
Yes.
In baselang, I'm seeing it like the thungs. Okay, it is a bit like, like I think almost like the next level. Like you don't know what you're looking at, but you're looking at a spaceship. And like you don't know because people have never seen a spaceship. Like where's the door? Where's the exhaust?
So baseline is basically first contact for us mere mortal developers. All right.
Exactly. And Alex is the emissary. I don't know which planet he comes from, but that's what I see too. And so I know who the other developer is. It's me, of course. What about the third one? Because you said like 3, like Alex is one of the top 3. No, seriously, who are the other 2? I want to know, in your opinion.
Dimitri from Bosch is one of the top developers that I've ever known. He definitely fits into that where and Dimitri is less of a kind of the architectural genius that Alex is. I mean, Alex is almost like a scientist with the way that he approaches problems. Dimitri is the prolific hacker. You put Dimitri on a problem and he will solve that problem. I mean, I hate that term 10x developer, but he will solve that problem so much faster than anybody else you can put on it. The problem is, Dimitri will tell you himself that he leaves some wreckage behind. And so you usually put a team in behind him to sweep.
Oh, yes. I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it, yeah. A team of sweepers. 10 sweepers behind him. 10.
Dimitri is the definition of properly used technical debt, right? If you're a startup and you need to solve a problem as fast as possible, and if you fail, you just go bankrupt, right? So you don't care about the technical debt. That'll be solved after your first round of funding, right? Then you want somebody like Dimitri there to get the proof out,
Okay, I'm going to open that door, seriously. YTT, K-App, I want to know what he was thinking. Bosch, I think he was on it for,
I thought YTT was actually really good compared to everything else that existed. If you would put Alex Sirachi on you get baselang, right? If you put Alex on the problem of YAML is difficult, like how do we make this, how do we allow configuration to be, easier to use and more extendable and such and less redundant, Alex will create something like baselang and Dimitri will create something like YTT. YTT gets the job done. It gets it done really well. It's so much better than JSONet and KSONet and all those.
Oh, yes.
But I'm sure that something like baselang solves many more problems at the same time, right? And just like Q solves many more problems at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good one. And number 3, I haven't forgotten. It's not me. I know it's not me.
Of course, it's yourself. It's yourself. What are you talking about? You weren't number 3, Gerhard. You were number 1. You were number 1, baby. Always will be.
Oh, man. My ego's exploding right now. Seriously.
No, I'm not going to name a number 3. I mean, there's been a bunch of other developers I've worked with who are just like phenomenal. And I'm going to let each one of them believe that they're number 3 so that nobody's...
Wow, man, that's so smart.
So nobody's heart is broken.
I like it. Okay, so it can be anyone. Okay, cool.
Could be anyone. It could be you, dear reader, dear listener.
Dear listener, yes, it could be you. If you worked with Tamer, it could be you. I know that's
of course. If you worked with me, it probably is you. You're number 3, of course.
And maybe you're still working with him, by the way. It doesn't exclude present ones.
Oh God, you're causing me so many problems.
Yeah. Maybe shade. Nobody knows.
It could be all of us. I mean, my next one-on-ones, they're going to be so difficult.
This episode is brought to you by SourceGraph. With the launch of their Code Insights product, teams can now track what really matters in their code base. Code Insights instantly transforms your code base into a queryable database to create visual dashboards in seconds. And I'm here with Joel Kortler, the product manager of Code Insights for SourceGraph. Joel, the way teams can use Code Insights seems to pretty much be limitless, but a particular problem every engineering team has is tracking versions of languages or packages. How big of a deal is it actually to track versions for teams?
Yeah, it's a big deal for a couple of reasons. The first is, of course, just compatibility. You don't want things to break when you're testing locally or to break on your CI systems or test systems. You need to have some sort of level of like version unification and minimum version support, and all of that needs to be, compatible forward. But the other thing we learned was that for a lot of customers, especially, engineering organizations that are pretty established, they have older versions of things, or even older versions of like SaaS tools they don't use anymore, that they haven't fully removed because they're like not sure if it's still in use, or they, lost focus on that. And they're spinning up old virtual machines that they're still paying for, or they're using, old SaaS subscriptions they're afraid to cancel because they're not sure if anyone's actually using it. And so getting off of those versions not just like saves you the headaches and the risks and the vulnerabilities of being on old versions, but also literally the money of, older systems running more slowly, or the build times, or, virtual machines and SaaS tools that you're no longer using. Before you had this ability, we talked to teams, there are basically three ways you could do this. You could Slack 1 million people and ask for just like an update point in time. You could have sort of one human in one spreadsheet where like it's somebody's job every Friday or every 2 weeks to just like search all the code and find all the versions and write it down in a Google Sheet. Or there were a couple of companies that I came across with in-house systems that were sort of complicated. You had to know, maybe Kotlin, but you didn't know Kotlin. But if you wanted to use the system, you had to learn Kotlin, and you'd have to sort of build the whole world from scratch and run basically a tool like this with a pretty steep learning curve. And now for all three of those, you could replace it with a single line SourceGraph search, which is basically just the name of the thing you're trying to track and the version string in the right format. And then we have templates that'll help you get started if you're not sure what that format is, and then it'll automatically track all the different versions for you, both historically. So even if you start using it today, you can see your historical patterns, and then of course going forward.
Very cool. Thank you, Joel. So right now there is a treasure trove of insights just waiting for you, living inside your code base right now. Teams are tracking migrations, adoption, deprecations. They're detecting and tracking versions of languages and packages. They're removing or ensuring the removal of security vulnerabilities. They understand their code by team. They can track their code smells and health, and they can visualize configurations and services and so much more with Code Insights. A good next step is to go to about.sourcegraph.com/code-insights. See how other teams are using this awesome feature. Again, about.sourcegraph.com/code-insights. This link is in the show notes. And by Flatfile, the leading data onboarding platform for teams who don't want to build yet another CSV uploader. Think of the last time you had to import data from a spreadsheet. You probably got some weird errors. You had to try a bunch of things like removing blank titles from rows and column headers. You probably had to find and replace special characters. You might even had to reach for Google to remind yourself yet again how to save with UTF-8 encoding. Here's the thing, you're just trying to get your file where it needs to go so you can do the thing you're trying to do in the first place. And your customers run into this same issue when it matters most, right after signing up for your product and getting started. The thing you're building, the product, is brought to life by data, your customers' data, the data they recognize, and every minute they spend trying to fix a spreadsheet, just like you were doing, is 1 minute less seeing the magic of the product, the thing you're building, the thing they just bought, and they're so excited to use. Now, companies of all sizes struggle with this issue. They don't realize that there's a solution out there, and they've accepted this as par for the course, optimizing for other ways to improve the customer experience. Some go as far as creating downloadable CSV templates and building their own in-house file importer. Then they send their customers to a lengthy knowledge base article on how to use it, and it just circumvents the entire process of getting started. Enter Flatfile. Flatfile is the data onboarding platform built to take the acute pain out of importing customer data into your product. With Flatfile, your product's experience is world-class on day one. It's built to handle everything from data mapping, field validation, and is meticulously designed to blend right into your platform. It turns a frustrating process for everyone into a delightful first experience for your customers. Flatfile is SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2 certified, GDPR compliant, and even HIPAA compliant. This ensures no matter where your customers are in the world, they're sharing data securely and in compliance every step of the way. The next step is to learn more and check them out at flatfile.com. Again, flatfile.com.
So we talked about this idea of the cool wall of cloud native before the episode. For those that don't know, I love Top Gear. My son, he's 12 years old. He loves Top Gear. He grew up with Top Gear. Top Gear is a TV car show presented by Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May. Now you're watching it on Amazon Prime. You know it as Grand Tour. We still watch it 10 years later, and it's still amazing. Thereabouts, whatever, like almost a decade. And they have this concept of the cool wall, where they go through some cars. It was introduced in season 1, Top Gear season 1. They go through some cars and they decide in which 4 categories does the car go. Is it a seriously uncool car? Is it an uncool car? Cool or sub-zero cool? And I'm thinking, how about we pick a few projects from the CNCF landscape and figure out which of the 4 categories they fit in.
I love it.
So the first one, again, it has to be Kubernetes. Where do we think it fits? Is it seriously uncool? Is it uncool, cool, or sub-zero cool? Where do we think Kubernetes fits, Tamer? And I'll let you go first.
Man, I want to say it's like it is the wall, right? But I think
That's a good one. I like it.
I think Kubernetes is definitely in the cool side. I mean, it's not sub-zero, right? It's not the best thing ever, but it is laying the bedrock for so much innovation. And it's the first time, not the first time, innovation goes back and forth, coming from the community, coming from enterprise. But let's be honest, enterprise teams, enterprise IT teams, infrastructure teams, they usually get starved on the innovation front. They're usually the ones who are wishing they get to play with all the stuff that the community is playing with. Kubernetes is one of those times when they got a chance and it really affected them in a massive way, right? The Kubernetes is innovating, starting with the enterprise. And I think that's great because they're underserved. You know, they've got all the money, but they're underserved. So cool. I'm going to put it in cool. What do you think?
I think it's right in the middle. I think it's right in between uncool and cool because it's starting to become this boring technology. It's really mature. It's been around for a long time. I think it reached peak maturity. If Boeing is using it, if Mercedes-Benz is using it, and the big companies are using it for some important mission-critical stuff,
Yeah.
I think that Kubernetes is uncool because it has to be. It has to be something that is table stakes. Everyone has Kubernetes these days. And I think it's right there in the middle.
Yeah, you wouldn't say that Linux is in the cool column anymore. Linux is now in the, whatever, boring, right?
Boring. That's a good one. Maybe we need to change the columns. Anyways, let's just see. I think it's right in the middle there. So we put it in the middle for now and we move on. What other project would you like to pick next?
All right, I'm gonna pick one that I think is going to be controversial. So let's go with the Open Policy Agent. So the thing that they killed PSPs for.
Oh my goodness me.
And if I remember correctly, the way that the cool wall actually worked in the TV show is one of the hosts was much taller than the other, right? And so if there was an extreme disagreement, that host could just take the card and put it up at the top and the other person couldn't reach it, right?
I don't remember who's taller, me or you. It's been too many years since we've been all both in the same room. And I think I have longer arms, but I think that you're, if I remember correctly, because when I would play table tennis, I could reach further, I think. That's what I remember. But I think you're slightly taller than me, so I don't know.
So OPA, where would you put it?
I would say uncool towards seriously uncool. Why is that? Because it's so damn difficult. Like whenever I think OPA...
Yes. Okay, it's not controversial. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking, oh my goodness me, where do I start? Do I really need this thing? Maybe not. It's not something that I want.
Why do they have to invent a whole new language for this thing? Why? Do you need Rego for this? No. And you know, just to double down on this statement, Kyverno. So if you're dear listener, if you're considering integrating OPA with your cluster, highly recommend you look at Kyverno instead. So much better implementation, so much simpler to use. The only problem is that Kyverno only works with Kubernetes, and if you're using Rego as a configuration language, like the OPA and things can work with your Terraform as well. But Kyverno is so much simpler, so much nicer. So I'd put that in the cool section.
Yeah. That's a good one. So what would you use Kyverno for? I've heard the name. I know roughly what it does, but I'm always hazy on the details.
Well, so you would use it in the same way you would use OPA, which is it acts as a easily configurable validating admission webhook. If you want to say that all pods, all pods have to have a pod topology constraint in order to be deployed to the production cluster, right? Then you would use Kyverno or OPA to enforce that at the API layer. So if anybody tries to create an object that doesn't conform to whatever that policy is, then it gets rejected. Now, one of the problems that we see with all this policy enforcement stuff, both at the API layer and also with like network policies and things like that, is that validating these highly complicated policies, there's no good tool for that, right? There's no good tool for you to have trust that your complicated policies, and they get really complicated the bigger they get, especially on the networking side, that they're actually working the way. So there's no like test-driven development for your policies, right?
Yeah.
And just to drop a little hint for the listeners, we're actually working on a product right now that will solve that problem and make superorbital into a unicorn. I'm sure of it. Right? Decacorn? What do they call them nowadays?
Decacorn, I'm pretty sure. 3 commas? The 3 comma club? Tres commas?
Whatever. Okay, so what's your next technology? Let's put another card on there.
All right, my next one. I know exactly where this one goes for me. That's why I'm going to mention it.
All right.
Argo CD.
Oh, well, okay. So when we were thinking about the columns, I was thinking of useful and less useful, right? But you're kind of saying, okay, cool is kind of like hip. So in the same way that Kubernetes is moving down the stack towards like boring, Argo CD is kind of becoming just the thing you do, right? There's no strong competitor anymore to Argo CD. So I'm going to put that in the, what was it, the boring column? Is that what we got now?
I think the boring one, yeah. I think we changed the uncool to the boring one, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And seriously, uncool, it's like maybe less than boring. It's just like something that maybe you wouldn't use. Something that, is like too difficult.
If I was chatting up somebody at a bar, trying to make something happen, I would not bring up Argo CD, right? That would be like, that's not interesting at all, right?
Yeah. So I understand that perspective, but for me, the UI makes it sub-zero cool. It's like if you want to see what happens in your Kubernetes cluster, like if you want to see that visual, it's almost
that visibility.
Exactly. You need to have Argo CD. And like a bunch of things start like light bulbs, multiple light bulbs, like a Christmas tree, goes off in your head when you realize what is actually happening in Kubernetes, in your Kubernetes cluster. What are all the workloads? How do they change state? How it syncs with a Git repository. I think like you have to have it.
It's incredibly useful. Like I said, it's table stakes now, right? That's why the EKS blueprints that AWS put out, they install Argo CD as the one and only thing that they put into the cluster, right? And this goes back to Kubernetes being a polished and mature product because the core team did not build in Argo CD. You can imagine if any other team was building something like Kubernetes, they would say, well, we need a better way of putting things into the cluster and a better way of giving visibility to people of how the cluster is operating and how all your workloads are behaving. So they would build something like Argo CD into the core product. That's a mistake, right? Kubernetes core team recognized that and they didn't, which is great.
Yeah. And I have seen something similar attempted before, a specific system which I tried and used product, Octant. And Octant, it was great as a first experience, like Brian Lyle, he created it to just visualize what is happening in Kubernetes, nice UI. But once the initial wowness wore off for me, I didn't see it like that valuable or that useful anymore. Argo CD is something that keeps on delivering even after you get past the dashboard. Is the whole GitOps model, is like just how it synchronizes. There's something there which I haven't seen with Octant. And I'm sure there's a few others that you can think of.
Yeah, like Lens or even K9S. Like
yes.
All of those are, that's what I was saying before about providing a new visualization of the existing Kubernetes objects is not that interesting, right? That's just a dashboard. If I like visual representations, it's useful, but it's not at all game changing. And so if you're going to build a platform on top of Kubernetes, and this is the thing that we have not seen done yet, you need to focus on the entire application as a whole, right? You're not delivering deployments in pods. Yeah. That's not what application developers are thinking about. They're thinking about their entire microservice architecture and how it integrates with external APIs and all the databases that it uses and all that kind of stuff. That's one big chunk of deliverability. I don't know. That's how it has to be focused. It has to be focused on the app, not the infrastructure. And all these dashboards like Octant and Lens and K9S, they're all focused on just the Kubernetes primitives. It's not that interesting. I don't know.
The nerd in me is missing the fact that changelog isn't running on Kubernetes. I have like a huge, how do you call it? Like when you miss something, you're like missing out on something. There's like a syndrome. It's not FOMO. Well, maybe it is FOMO. Maybe that's what I'm thinking. Like I'm like the fear of missing out on all the cool things in the Kubernetes and the CNCF landscape because I'm no longer using Kubernetes. It's almost like I need an excuse to use it again, just like to stay connected to all those cool technologies, like to be able to try Kyverno, to try like all the new stuff that is coming out. Maybe not so much like on the when things go wrong, it can be quite challenging to figure out what the hell is going on because it's a really complex system. And I think that just goes back to the platform. If there was a platform built on top of Kubernetes to simplify this, to just like, figure out like a bunch of things so you can get that, I think that would be really useful because there's like a whole ecosystem that you're missing out on if you don't use Kubernetes. And while you can use many of the tools outside, I think they make less sense. And I think that's why, coming back to your comment, Tamer, Kubernetes is the board.
Yes.
Everything happens on Kubernetes. And if you don't have it, well, Terraform and VMs, it is for you. That's our CloudFormation. That's it.
I mean, Terraform it's the ubiquitous substrate. It has changed, and it is still in the process of changing what it means to be on the cloud. And that's the beauty of it.
That's the legs for the board. The board
yes,
has
exactly.
or the wall on which you hang the board. Something like that. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well,
I got one now. I'm gonna. How about Crossplane? What do you think of Crossplane?
That's a good one. I had it on my list. I was thinking about it actually. Like I wanted to mention it. Yeah, you did. Okay. Well, I think we can make this the last one because it's a very, very interesting one. So, Crossplane, I really liked it when it came out. I really liked using it with TerraJet, which is Terraform in Crossplane. Episode 33, we even tried it to lay down our LKE cluster. I think there's something about compositions which makes it difficult. I was never able to get past that point. There's a lot of YAML that you have to go through to understand how compositions work. And I think at some point it's becoming too meta, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel the same way when I was playing with it. I had exactly the same experience. The compositions were just a little too brain bending, a little too hard to actually juggle in a real situation.
Yeah.
But the idea behind it is still it's still a super cool. Sub-Zero idea.
Sub-Zero,
yeah.
Cool. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Sub-Zero idea, and then what are the other categories?
Seriously uncool, cool, and Sub-Zero cool.
Sub-Zero idea and a maybe even seriously uncool implementation, unfortunately. But the idea that the Kubernetes API is the real value of Kubernetes. It is. We teach this in our workshops. We really hammer this home with students that like even if you're not dealing with containers, the immutable, declarative, incredibly predictable, idempotent API that is Kubernetes is fantastic. And you can use that, you can leverage that to provision things outside the cluster. There's even a project, it's not coming to me right now, but there's a project that is just the Kubernetes API without the scheduler and without all the built-in resource types.
I know what you mean. I'm forgetting the name. I know what you mean. I'll try to put it in the show notes. Yeah, that's a good one.
And I mean, it's a proof of concept. Like nobody's actually using that project for anything, but it shows that even without the domain, just the bare structure of the Kubernetes API is a fantastic API for all kinds of workloads, all kinds of operational tasks. And things like Crossplane are trying to leverage that API to allow for you to provision things outside the cluster. And it could be really cool, just not the right implementation yet.
Yep. I like that. I can get behind that for sure. Okay. We have time for one more bombshell. Do you want to deliver it or shall I? we need to go to the Top Gear theme. All right. So in the previous episode, we had Alex Sirachi talking about Concourse, talking about Base again. This is in the future, from the future. It's very confusing because we're recording this before that other episode, which is coming out before it.
And you're going to predict what he's about to say. Yes.
Exactly. That makes it very, very challenging. So, and I see Alex as the builder, definitely the builder. And then I always saw you as not the product person, because you clearly you don't enjoy it. Like I think you're good at it, but I don't think you enjoy it as much as other things. But I see you like the planner in a lot of ways, because you see how kind of like the big items, how they kind of fit together, and you start seeing like the trends and you see like what makes sense and what doesn't. Do you see yourself the same way, or is it just me?
Well, I'm very flattered by that to start off. I never have had confidence in my ability to predict wider trends. I've actually felt that Alex was was a lot better than myself at that. Some of my skills are around just in general planning, right? And just looking at a project and understanding, making myself into a project manager here, but looking at something that needs to be done and being able to break it down and,
You're actually a PM when he said 2 thumbs, so you were a PM. I forgot about that.
But my superpower is worrying. So this is why
Chief Warrior.
I was a really good operations person. Yeah, I always worried about the edge cases, right? And when I code slowly because I'm always worried about not only bugs, but like what use case am I not thinking about that's going to break down? And so, yeah, when I'm working on a project with other developers, part of my role that I end up taking on is just but what about person, right? So I'm always the person saying we got to worry about this one thing. Let's not forget that because that's actually important, Yeah. And the thing that I've had to learn, and it's been transformative for me, the thing I've had to learn is when to recognize a risk and be able to say, but I'm not worried about it. It's okay. We'll hit that later. That is a deferrable problem, right? I don't need to worry about that now. And if you do that 9 times out of 10, then that one problem that you actually did need to solve right now, that's the one that you fix right off the bat.
Yeah, that's a good one. I always noticed that you had good instincts. And because I have seen the long term with you, I've seen where we've gone with Kubernetes, remember Cloud Foundry, the potential, what it could have been, it wasn't, that's okay, it happens. Concourse, Kubernetes now, and Superorbital, where it's going, some of the people that, you just go on instinct. And I think a planner needs to have that because you need to understand how those big pieces, some of them are people, by the way, fit together.
Yes. And we have been #blessed. We have had so many amazing people working with us and who we're talking about hiring right now who want to work with us. So been very lucky in that regard.
Yeah, I see the same way. So the bombshell is that these 3 episodes are connected. The third one is the visionary. I cannot say who is going to be in this episode. It will need to be a surprise, but it's someone that connects everything together. It's all linked. Tamer, Alex, this other person, it's all linked. And I'm so looking forward to that. That is the bombshell.
I have a guess.
You can't say Tamer. You can't say.
I'm not going to say it, but I have a guess. I'll shoot you an email after and see if I can figure it out.
Afterwards, yes. Let's do that afterwards. Let's not spoil the surprise. I'm thinking we need to do this again for Jared's birthday because I know that he enjoys this conversation so much. But maybe also in 6 months' time, maybe. Let's see.
That would be wonderful.
What the future story holds. But I'm enjoying this so much. Thank you very much for today.
I have so much fun, Gerhard. You make this so much fun every time. Thank you.
Always. Thank you very much. It takes two. It takes two, at least. All right, Tamer. See you next time. Thank you very much. See you. Bye. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Ship It. Check out our other podcasts for developers at changelog.com/master. You can connect with like-minded developers via changelog.com/community. Thank you Fastly for the worldwide low-latency changelog.com. Our listeners love those blazing fast MP3s. The Firecracker VMs and the WireGuard integration is really sweet. Fly.io. That's it for this week. See you all next week. The next episode is the grand finale in this 3-episode miniseries. All 3 guests were former pivots. And since you already know that every 11th Ship It episode is special, the next one is going to be a first from many perspectives. The only thing that I can share is that you should do what works, keep it simple, and be kind.